A sunny day. The creak of swings and children's laughter that seems eternal. Into this perfect world, he walks, slowly, but with the relentless determination of a glacier. Mothers on the benches fall silent. He doesn't look at them. His target? A bright yellow plastic slide in the center of the playground. He climbs to the top. A brief, ringing silence follows. And then, the first shout. Stunned children's faces look up from below. Over the next 3 minutes he would shatter their world. But the strangest part wasn't what he shouted, it was why he chose this specific playground. This place. It's an almost sacred space with its own unwritten code of safety. His ascent up the slide wasn't just an oddity. It was a breach of the sanctuary's protocol, the equivalent of someone bursting into an operating room during surgery. Who was he? A madman? An activist? A grieving father? His face showed not insanity, but a desperate, focused resolve. This isn't a story about madness. It's a story about a reason. Historians are familiar with this look. It's not the chaos of a lunatic, but the energy of a missionary. It's the look of John Brown before his raid on Harper's Ferry, the look of a man so convinced of his righteousness that he's willing to burn down the world to prove it. He could have written a book. He could have started a blog. But he chose the most absurd way to deliver his truth. There is a logic to his actions. The medium is the message. He didn't just choose the playground as a stage, he made it part of his argument. His message was simple: your lies. Begin here, so my truth will begin here. This is an investigation into one of the strangest of human acts. We will conduct what criminologists call a psychological autopsy, an examination of his life, motives, and triggers to understand the exact cause of death for his rational behavior. His name was Mark. He was 42 years old, and just a year ago, he was a middle school biology teacher, respected by his colleagues and beloved by his students for his knack for turning science into a magic trick. Here's a photo of him before, a smiling man in glasses standing in front of a dinosaur skeleton. This man and the one on the slide are two different species. Mark was known for his kitchen DNA test. Using salt, soap, and alcohol, he taught children to extract DNA from a strawberry. He made science tangible, almost magical. The irony is that he would later try to repeat this trick, but on a playground. Everything changed after a single parent-teacher conference. He was accused of being overly realistic, of destroying children's psyches for trying to explain the basics of genetics to 8th graders. It wasn't just a complaint. It was a public denunciation that cost him his job. It was his own personal Scopes monkey trial. Only instead of the Bible versus the theory of evolution, it was a gentle fairy tale versus cold genetics. And he lost. He was the best of us, says his former principal, but he didn't see the line. He believed truth is a vaccine, and the earlier you administer it, the better. He didn't understand that for some children, it's poison. It's like chemotherapy. Yes, it kills cancer. But if you give an adult dose to an infant, it kills the patient too. Mark wanted to cure them of ignorance, but his dosage proved lethal. Fired and isolated, Mark began keeping a journal. These weren't just entries, they were the draft of a manifesto. And the last line before the incident reads, "They wouldn't listen to me in the classroom, so I must go to where the lie is born, to its cradle." This is the logic of a doctor who decides not to treat cholera patients, but to blow up the well they all drink from. Mark stopped treating the symptom, ignorance in the classroom, and decided to attack the source, the myths of the playground. The first thing he shouted from the top of the slide wasn't about sex. It was about code. He yelled, "You're being deceived. The Stork is just a metaphor for a genetic program. You are not a miracle. You are a result." To him, hiding biological truth was a crime against human nature, a way to make children weak and unadaptive. This myth came to us from 19th century German folklore. For Mark, it wasn't a harmless story. It was an outdated information virus, malicious code that was long overdue for deletion from a child's operating system. He called these fairy tales informational sugar, a sweet lie that inevitably leads to intellectual diabetes. He was convinced that a society that lies to its children about where they come from will lie to them about everything else, about politics, economics, and history. His logic was not unfounded. Studies show that a huge percentage of adults believe in pseudoscientific theories. For Mark, this was no coincidence. He saw a direct, unbroken line from believing in the stork to believing in a flat earth. Think for a moment about the most absurd thing you believed as a child, that the tooth fairy was a kind of venture capitalist for baby teeth, that if you swallowed a watermelon seed, a watermelon would grow inside you. Now remember the feeling when you learned the truth, a slight disappointment, a sense of betrayal? Mark simply took that feeling and multiplied it by 1,000. In psychology, this is called an epistemic rupture. It's the moment when trust in your primary source of knowledge, your parents, collapses. For most of us, it's a small jolt. For Mark, it was an earthquake that shattered his world. His final argument from the top of the slide was the most frightening. He screamed that children who believe in storks grow into adults who believe in conspiracy theories. For him, the stork was a gateway drug. Today, it's a harmless bird bringing babies. Tomorrow, it's chemtrails in the sky, reptilians in the government, and vaccine refusal. He saw this children's tale as the first step toward the atrophy of critical thinking. Does this sound like the ranting of an obsessed man? Perhaps. But these three truths were not just ideas to him. Each was born from a deep personal trauma, a trauma almost no one knew about, and one that was directly connected to his own child. His public obsession was merely the tip of the iceberg. We only saw the ice on the surface, but deep below the water hid a vast, unseen mass of personal grief and guilt. Doctors diagnosed him with acute stress disorder. It's a convenient, simple explanation, but it's incomplete. It's like saying the cause of a forest fire was a tree catching fire. Yes, that's true. But it doesn't explain the years of drought or the carelessly tossed cigarette that acted as the catalyst. There is another deeper layer to his actions. In psychology, it's called the Cassandra complex. It's the state you're in when you see the truth and scream about it, but everyone around you thinks you're insane. Mark saw his Troy about to fall, a society that had abandoned science. The term comes from Greek tragedy. Cassandra, a princess of Troy, was cursed by the god Apollo. She could see the future, but no one would ever believe her prophecies. She screamed in terror about the wooden horse, while everyone else saw only a gift from the gods. Let's evaluate both versions. A nervous breakdown, an 80% probability. This is a medical fact. But what was its fuel? The Cassandra complex isn't a diagnosis, it's a context. It's what turned a quiet breakdown into a loud performance. The probability that he felt like Cassandra, 100%. The nervous breakdown was the kinetic energy of his act, the explosion itself. The Cassandra complex was the potential energy, built up over years of humiliation, loss, and a sense of righteousness that no one else shared. This energy was born from tragedy. Mark had a son who died as a teenager from a genetic disease. Mark was convinced that if he and his wife had known more about biological truth, it could have been avoided. His war against storks was a distorted battle with his own guilt. His son had cystic fibrosis, a recessive disease. Mark and his wife were asymptomatic carriers. They didn't know. For him, the stork became a symbol of this fatal blindness, of this faith in luck where knowledge was needed. He wasn't fighting a fairy tale. He was fighting the ghost of his own what if. On the playground, the first reaction wasn't fear. It was paralysis. The mothers froze like deer in headlights. Then, paralysis gave way to anger. Some covered their children's ears. Others yelled at him to get down. A few took out their phones. This wasn't a desire to document the event. Psychologists call it the distancing effect. When reality becomes too threatening, we instinctively put a screen between ourselves and it. They weren't filming a video, they were turning a live, unpredictable threat into safe, digital content. The children reacted differently. To them, he wasn't a monster. He was just a strange adult saying loud, incomprehensible things. One boy, according to witnesses, turned to his mother and asked, "What's a genetic program?" Mark was making a fundamental error. According to Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development, the children on that playground were in the pre-operational stage. They were not yet capable of abstract thought. He was trying to explain calculus to them when they were still learning to count to 10. He was broadcasting on a frequency their brains simply couldn't receive. For the police who arrived, this was a categorical error. Their protocols have a procedure for getting a cat out of a tree, but not for getting a biology teacher off a children's slide. The officer's dialogue with Mark was the height of absurdity. "Sir, please stop disturbing the public order." To which Mark replied, "I'm not disturbing order, I'm creating it." His act caused a glitch in their decision-making system. He didn't fit into any of their pre-made categories. At the station, during the interrogation, Mark was completely calm. This wasn't a return to normalcy. It's what psychologists call a post-adrenaline calm. When a mission you've long prepared for is complete, a sense of emptiness and peace sets in. He was like a soldier after a decisive battle. He had fired his shot, and now the consequences didn't matter to him. To every question, he repeated the same phrase: "I just gave them a lesson, the one they took from me." That lesson didn't stay within the walls of the station. It broke out. The video from the playground exploded on local social media, and society fractured. Mark's act became a kind of cultural Rorschach test. People looked at the same inkblot, the same video from the slide, but saw completely different things. Some saw a threat, others a cry of despair, still others a tragic hero. The reaction said more about the viewers than about him. On one side stood the camp of innocence defenders, their position: childhood should be magical and last as long as possible. On the other, the early preparation camp, their creed: the real world is harsh, and the sooner you give a child the armor of truth, the better their chances. The very idea of a protected childhood is a recent invention, a product of the Victorian era. For centuries before that, children were just small adults. They worked, they saw death, and they knew the truth. Mark, in his radical way, was a proponent of this pre-Victorian approach. It's the timeless choice from the Matrix. Do you give your child the blue pill, a beautiful fairy tale about a stork that leaves them in a cozy world of illusion? Or do you give them the red pill, the complex, uncomfortable truth of biology that shows how things really work? Mark wasn't offering a choice. He was an agent forcibly shoving the red pill down children's throats. His method was monstrous, there's no doubt about that. He caused trauma. But the question he posed, albeit in a deranged form, is absolutely legitimate. He forced everyone to search for the line between a protective lie and a necessary truth. Society is held together by what Plato called the noble lie, myths that help maintain order, like Santa Claus teaching us to be good. But Mark was convinced that this noble lie about the stork had long since rotted. It had become toxic. Mark's tragedy is that he wanted to be a teacher but became a bogeyman. To avoid repeating his mistakes, there is a protocol for any difficult conversation. Let's call it the concentric circles method. You start with the smallest, simplest circle of truth, and you only expand it when the child is ready to take a step outward themselves. First, context. Never start spontaneously. Choose a quiet moment, not in public, but at home, perhaps before bed. Psychologists note a phenomenon often seen in cars. Conversations in a car are often easier because the lack of direct eye contact reduces pressure. It gives the child the freedom to think, not just react. Second, language. Mark spouted terminology. This is a mistake. Children think in images. Instead of genetic program, you can use the analogy of a cake recipe. Mom and dad each have their own ingredients. This is the principal educator Jerome Bruner called a spiral curriculum. You provide a simple, working model, and then, year after year, you return to it, adding new, more complex details. Third, dosage. The most common mistake is to give all the information at once. If a child asks where babies come from, they are not asking for a lecture on the reproductive system. Answer exactly what was asked. Babies come from a special cell inside a mommy's tummy. Be like Google, not Wikipedia. Give a short, direct answer to the query. Don't dump the entire 30-page article at once. Let the child click on the next link by asking a follow-up question. So who was Mark? A dangerous madman who belongs in an institution, or a tragic prophet who simply chose the wrong method? The verdict is yours. Was he a madman whose personal tragedy spawned a dangerous obsession, with his ideas being merely a symptom? Or a prophet, a man who saw a real societal problem but in a desperate attempt to make us listen, lost his mind?